They say time heals everything. But what if the wound is so deep that time only makes it feel more real? Some believe losing a child is the greatest pain a person can ever face. I lost two. And before you think this is a story about defeat, I need to tell you something. It's not. My name is Luna Watkins. I'm 43 years old, I live in Bellevue, Washington, and I volunteer caring for abandoned children. But it wasn't always this way. There was a time when I didn't want to hear the sound of children laughing, didn't want to see toys around the house, and couldn't bear to step into the empty bedroom. I believed my life had ended right there. It was at the moment I wanted to give up the most that I discovered something that went against everything I believed. Sometimes God's greatest gift comes wrapped in what hurts the most. Today, looking back, I realize my pain didn't destroy me. It gave me a purpose I never could have imagined. And if you think it's impossible to turn your wound into a source of life, just wait until you hear what happened to me. Before the tragedies, my life was simple and full of ordinary dreams. A warm home, a close-knit family, and plenty of plans for the future. Benjamin, my husband of more than 20 years, and I built our life together brick by brick, literally, since he's a carpenter who has always had a gift for turning wood into art. Our conversations on the porch were about travel, laughter, and raising our children with faith and love. I never imagined that one day I would introduce myself with a story like mine. Back then, I thought faith was something you kept without much questioning, like lighting a candle and letting it burn quietly in the corner. My walk with God was steady, with few ups and downs, and maybe that's why it never crossed my mind that He might be about to shake the deepest roots of my soul. I was active in church, took part in prayer groups, but I'll admit, life felt more about stability than transformation. And when you live like that, you start to believe nothing will ever really change. But I was about to learn that life doesn't send a warning before it turns upside down. And sometimes the deepest silence isn't at night. It's the one that settles inside your home when something breaks forever. What I didn't know back then was that every detail of my story would be used for a purpose I would never have dared to ask for, but one that would change everything. That day seemed to start like any other, but there was something strange in the air, as if the world had slowed down. I was at the hospital with Benjamin holding my hand while we waited for news about our daughter Harper. She was only 5 years old, full of life, full of questions I couldn't always answer. And now she was there, fighting something no mother's hug could heal. When the doctor walked in and lowered his eyes, I knew my prayer in that moment needed to be stronger than any words I had ever spoken. But still, the inevitable came. What followed was the cruelest sound I've ever heard. Silence. No laughter, no little footsteps running down the hallway, no voice calling, "Mommy." We went back home, and it felt like the air was heavier. Harper's room stayed untouched, as if she might walk back in at any moment. I found myself sitting on the floor, holding her pillow, trying to understand how life could keep going without my little girl. In that moment, even my faith felt far away. The strangest part was that the world outside kept moving, as if nothing had happened. People went to work, talked, laughed, while inside me there was nothing but a deep emptiness. I kept asking myself, how could God allow silence to take over like this? I didn't know it yet, but that silence would become the first chapter of a testimony still being written, and somehow He had already started moving pieces I couldn't see. The first few months after Harper was gone felt like walking through a thick fog. I woke up each day, but it didn't feel like I was really living. Every corner of the house reminded me of her. The mug with crooked drawings she painted at school, the doll in the blue dress left on the couch. Benjamin tried to be strong, but I knew that inside, he was falling apart too. Praying was hard, not because I had stopped believing in God, but because every word seemed to get stuck in my throat, as if I no longer knew what to ask for. Some days, I clung to small things, just to keep from sinking. Cooking her favorite meal, even if no one would eat it. Organizing drawers, just to have something to focus on. And other days, I would simply sit by the window, staring out, without noticing how much time had passed. It's strange how, in grief, you learn to survive 1 minute at a time. Benjamin would suggest walks in the park, and even though I resisted, I realized that somehow the crisp air and the sound of leaves helped calm the storm inside me. It was during that time that I learned something. Breathing through grief doesn't mean forgetting, it means learning to live with the absence. It's allowing the pain to exist without letting it become everything. I didn't know it then, but those small daily choices, even the simplest ones, were preparing my heart for a much greater calling. And when it came, I would need to be ready to say yes. When I found out I was pregnant again, it was like a beam of light breaking through the heavy cloud that had been hanging over me. Benjamin and I looked at each other with a mix of surprise and caution, as if we were afraid to celebrate too much. Deep down, I knew joy was there, but so was a quiet fear, like my heart was trying to protect itself. Still, I caught myself making plans, imagining the nursery, choosing names, dreaming about the prayers I would speak over that crib. Every checkup, every heartbeat we heard in Dr. Clara Whitmore's office felt like a confirmation that God was still writing our story. But at the same time, there was that lingering thought, what if it happens again? I didn't want my faith to be smothered by fear, but shutting off that voice wasn't easy. Benjamin would remind me, Luna, let's take it 1 day at a time. And maybe that was the wisest advice I've ever been given. I started praying in a different way, not just asking for protection, but fully placing the future in God's hands. It felt like each conversation with him was a reminder that my part was to trust, even when I didn't understand everything. And for the first time in a long while, I felt my heart beating for something beyond the pain, but I still had no idea what was coming next. I thought nothing could be more painful than losing Harper, but when we lost Cole, our second child, I realized there's a deeper layer of pain, one that has no words. The day began with troubling symptoms, and within hours we were back at the hospital, like a cruel déjà vu. Dr. Clara walked in with the same look I had prayed I would never see again, and there, with little left to say, she confirmed, our baby didn't make it. It felt like the ground had opened up and swallowed me whole. This time, even my faith seemed to crumble. I didn't want to talk to anyone, not even to God. It was as if prayer had become an echo, bouncing off the walls of my heart and returning empty. I remember thinking, if he is love, why would he let this happen again? Benjamin tried to hold me together, but I could see the same despair in his eyes, and the silence that filled our home again felt even heavier than before. Deep down, I knew the story wasn't over yet, but I couldn't imagine where it could possibly go. That double grief left me feeling like life had lost all meaning. What I couldn't see was that even there, in the darkest place, God was still at work, preparing a path I would never have chosen, but one that would completely change my testimony. There was a room in our house that felt frozen in time. The light-colored walls, the crib already set up, the furniture we had chosen so carefully. Everything was there, waiting for a baby who would never come. Whenever I walked in, it felt like a knot tightened in my throat. It wasn't just a physical space, It was the symbol of a dream that had been shattered twice. The soft scent of baby powder and fresh sheets seemed to mock the absolute silence. Many times, I would sit on the floor with my back against the wall, staring at that crib. Sometimes I whispered prayers, asking God to give me the strength just to get up from there. Other times, I simply cried. Benjamin avoided going in as if that room were forbidden territory. It was like we were trying to protect our wounds from being reopened. But in truth, they had never really closed. Over time, I began to realize that room was shaping something in me, even if I didn't understand it yet. Every day it reminded me of the pain, but also of a question I couldn't silence. What if God has another plan for this space? I didn't know it then, but the answer would come in a completely unexpected way. It was on a cold Sunday afternoon that Pastor Lincoln Foster asked to speak with me after the service. I was sitting in the pew, trying to avoid those looks of pity, when he walked over with that calm yet steady way about him. He didn't start with ready-made Bible verses or rehearsed lines. Instead, he asked, "Luna, have you ever thought that God might use your pain to bring life to others?" I'll admit, my first reaction was to shut my heart. Use my pain? But the calm in his eyes made me listen until the end. He shared stories of people who, even in tragedy, found purpose in serving. He told me about a couple who lost a child but chose to open their home to children with no family. And as I listened, something began to stir inside me. I found myself thinking about the empty room, about my interrupted prayers, and I wondered, could this be it? But at the same time, fear and insecurity shouted back, "You won't survive going through more loss." Before I left, the pastor said something that kept echoing in my mind. "Luna, God doesn't waste a single tear. Every one of them can water a new story." That day, for the first time in a long while, I walked out of church feeling that maybe, just maybe, my life could still have a chapter worth writing. I just had no idea how or when it would begin. In the beginning, taking any step was hard. I had gotten used to living on autopilot, avoiding places, people, and conversations that might touch my wound. But after that conversation with Pastor Lincoln, something started to stir, almost like God was nudging my heart, saying, "Get up." That's when I accepted the invitation to help in the kitchen at a community event at church. It was a simple thing, but for me, it felt like opening a window after being locked away for a long time. As I chopped vegetables and served plates, I realized my mind was focused on something other than the pain. I started talking to people I hadn't seen in months, and I even managed to laugh at little things. It wasn't some instant miraculous change, but it was enough to feel a breath of life again. I learned that when we put our hands to serve, our hearts begin to find space to breathe. That day, when I got home, I looked at the empty room, and for the first time, I didn't feel only sadness. I felt curiosity. It was as if God was preparing something I still couldn't see. And deep down, I knew this had only been the first step in a much bigger journey. It was on a rainy Tuesday when I got the call from Karen Douglas, a social worker I knew from church. Her voice was direct, but carried a gentle urgency. "Luna, we need a temporary home for a teenager. It's only for a few days, until we can find a permanent solution." My first instinct was to say no. After all, I didn't feel ready to open my heart again. But something deep inside made me pause before answering. Karen explained that the boy had nowhere to stay and that there wasn't another family available at the moment. I remembered Pastor Lincoln's words about God using our tears to water new stories. I took a deep breath and said, "All right, you can send him." When I hung up the phone, my heart started racing. It wasn't just fear, it was the sense that I was about to step through a door that would change everything. As I prepared the room, the same room that had once been a symbol of pain, I noticed my hands were trembling. I put on fresh bedding, adjusted a small lamp, and even placed a Bible on the nightstand. It felt like, with every detail, I was declaring this space will be used for life. What I didn't know was that by welcoming that boy, it would be my own life that would begin to be rebuilt. When Eli Matthews arrived, I was nervous and anxious, unsure of how to act. He was a 14-year-old teenager with a weary look and a worn-out backpack on his shoulders. I kept wondering how many times he must have heard empty promises from adults and how hard it would be for him to trust me. But at the same time, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe God was giving me a chance to learn how to love again. In the first few days, Eli stayed distant and barely looked me in the eyes. I tried to create small routines, having breakfast together, helping him tidy his room, listening to his stories. Each gesture seemed small, but little by little, I started noticing small changes. He smiled, asked questions, showed interest in things he had ignored before. That's when I realized that welcoming someone isn't just about providing a roof over their head. It's about creating a safe space for their heart to grow. Then, one day, he said something that stayed with me. I never thought anyone could really care. In that moment, I felt that all the pain, all the grief, all the silence that had filled my home before was beginning to transform into purpose. Eli wasn't just a teenager I was caring for. He was teaching me, without even knowing it, that faith shows itself through acts of love. After welcoming Eli, I realized something had changed inside me. That room, which had once been a symbol of loss, now had life. I began to see that maybe we could open our doors to other children who needed a temporary home. Benjamin looked at me with that mix of surprise and concern, but at the same time, I knew he felt that God was guiding us toward something bigger. We started slowly, one child at a time, learning to navigate fears, traumas, and weary glances. Every smile we earned felt like a small victory, and every act of affection we received was a confirmation that we were on the right path. Our home, which had once felt too small to hold so much pain, began to overflow with life and new stories. It was then that I realized something profound. Welcoming a child isn't just about giving a roof over their head, it's about planting roots of hope. Every story that came to us was an opportunity to show that God doesn't abandon anyone, even when life seems unfair. And in the process, I began to feel my own faith renewing, turning each scar into strength. When Sophie Hartman arrived at our home, I immediately realized it wouldn't be easy. She was only 9 years old, but her eyes held a sadness far deeper than her age should allow. Her history of abandonment and rejection had left invisible scars that showed up as fear, silence, and distrust. I knew it would take a lot of patience, prayer, and faith to help her feel safe and loved. The first few days were challenging. Sophie kept to herself, refused meals, and wouldn't even look at me. Every attempt to reach out seemed to fail, and I'll admit I felt like giving up many times. But inspired by the testimony God was writing in my own life, I kept going. Small gestures, offering a drawing, sitting beside her, listening without speaking, began to break down the walls she had built around her heart. And then, little by little, Sophie began to smile. A shy smile, but a real one. When she finally hugged me, I felt that every tear shed for my lost children had been preparation for that moment. I understood that welcoming someone in pain is also an act of faith, and that every story of abandonment can be transformed into hope when love is offered consistently and genuinely. Over time, our home stopped being just a house and became a true shelter. Every corner that once held pain now echoed with laughter, scattered toys, and stories being built. Benjamin and I got used to the busy routine, making breakfast for everyone, helping with homework, giving attention to the little ones, and above all, creating a safe and loving environment. Every child who arrived brought challenges, but also the chance to cultivate faith and hope. I learned that welcoming someone isn't just about physical space. It's about daily presence and dedication. Sleepless nights became common, as did constant worry over each child's well-being. Yet every smile, every unexpected hug, every small achievement reminded us of the greater purpose behind our efforts. God was using every detail to transform pain into mission. And that's when I realized that my story, marked by the loss of Harper and Cole, was now intertwined with the stories of these children. Every tear, every silent prayer, every act of love became a living testimony of faith. And even on the most exhausting rites, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be, participating in something far greater than myself. Not everything was easy or filled with joy. There were nights when I would sit in the kitchen, tired and heavy with fatigue, wondering if I could really keep going. The weight of responsibility, the tears that kept returning, and the longing for Harper and Cole made every day a challenge. Sometimes praying felt like it wasn't enough, and I questioned whether I was ready to carry so much love and pain all at once. Benjamin was by my side, but I felt that even he couldn't carry my anguish. I questioned my faith, questioned my limits, and wondered if God really knew what he was doing by allowing me to care for so many lives. Each child had their own wounds, and I had to be whole to offer something that often seemed impossible: hope. Still, in the midst of exhaustion, I realized something vital. Faith isn't the absence of doubt, it's persisting despite it. Every small act of care I could offer, every smile earned, every prayer answered, reminded me that God was with me, even when my strength seemed to fail. And in that way, I learned that continuing isn't about human power. It's about surrender and trusting in the greater purpose he has for my life. Abby Brooks came into our lives unexpectedly, but with a strength no one could ignore. She was a teenager full of stories, some marked by pain, others by abandonment, and she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. When I met her, something clicked inside me, a feeling that this was a different, deeper connection, one that would bring healing not only for her, but also for my own heart. The first few days were about adjustment, but gradually, Abby began to open up. She shared her fears, frustrations, even her small victories, and I realized that with every word, she was also helping to rebuild my faith. Every moment together showed me that God works in mysterious ways, using unexpected encounters to turn pain into love and hope. When Abby finally called me Mom, I felt a mix of emotion and gratitude that words can't fully capture. It was as if Harper and Cole, in some way, were there with me, allowing me the chance to love fully once again. My womb had cried, but my heart was now learning to give life in another way, and that was the greatest blessing I could have received. Over time, I realized that every act of love I offered to the children in our care was deeply rooted in the memory of Harper and Cole. They were no longer physically present, but every smile that appeared, every hug I received, reminded me of the importance of honoring their lives. The pain of loss gradually transformed into a quiet strength that guided me in every decision and gesture of care. Benjamin and I often talked about how our children had left an invisible yet powerful legacy. Every story of resilience from the children we welcomed seemed to carry a piece of what Harper and Cole might have been, or the lessons they could have taught. I began to see that my faith, my prayers, and my testimony weren't just about me. They were about transforming suffering into tangible hope. And so I understood that losing didn't mean the end. It meant preparing the way. What was once empty now overflowed with life through every child who found a home with us. Every memory, every tear shed for my children now had a purpose far beyond myself. And I began to see that God was using that pain to write a story of love that no one could erase. I've learned that true strength doesn't come from human effort alone, but from the faith that sustains us when everything seems to fall apart. Every challenge, every sleepless night, every silent tear was an opportunity to experience God's care in a tangible way. Prayers stopped being just repeated words and became an intimate conversation where I could hand over my exhaustion and doubts and receive courage and guidance in return. In the hardest moments, when I felt my physical and emotional strength reaching its limit, it was faith that kept me standing. I saw in every child we welcomed a living testimony that God transforms pain into purpose. Benjamin felt this presence too, and together we learned that trusting in God's providence doesn't mean problems disappear. It means being certain that every step is guided. Today I realize that the strength that comes from above is continuous, silent, and often invisible. It shows up in the small victories of everyday life, in recovered smiles, in answered prayers. And as I continue this journey, I know that God still has many chapters to write in our story, always reminding us that faith is what connects us to what seems impossible. After so many years of pain and loss, I realized that my womb wept like never before, yet my heart found a new rhythm, full of life and purpose. Every child we welcomed, every smile gained, every small daily victory transformed my sorrow into strength. I understood that God never wastes tears, and that even silence and absence can become seeds of hope for other hearts. When I look at my home today, I see the reflection of God's grace. Dozens of children who have found a home, care, love, and faith. My story of loss was not in vain. It became the foundation of a living testimony, showing that even amid pain, God has a greater plan. Every prayer I offered, every moment of despair, every tear helped prepare the ground where hope could blossom. And so I keep walking, knowing that pain is part of the journey, but faith sustains every step. What began as unbearable emptiness has transformed into a home full of stories, laughter, and love. My womb wept, but my heart, guided by God, brought forth hope. And with each new day, this mission is renewed, paving paths I can't yet even imagine. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that no pain is too great for God to turn into purpose. But the question is, will you keep focusing on what you've lost, or will you choose to live for what you can still create? How many lives could be touched if you stopped hiding your scars? Maybe it's time to turn your story into hope for someone else. I'm Luna Watkins, and today I had the privilege of sharing my story here on Faith Story. This channel has given me a space to transform my pain into something that can reach hearts, and it can do the same with your story. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do it now to keep hearing and sharing testimonies that inspire and challenge. And I want to invite you to something special. Use the comments to share what God has already done in your life. Who knows? Your story might be the next one shared here. Because in the end, every testimony is a seed, and yours could change someone's destiny.